Bhaktivedanta Swami Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai, ISKCON Ki Jai, Nitai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd Canto, Status Quo, Chapter 8, text number 6. Muhur Grinanto Bachashanuraga. Muhur Grinanto Bachashanuraga. Kalat Padenasya Kritani Tat Yana Skalat Padenasaya Kritani Tatyaha Kirita Sahasra Mani Pravika Kirita Sahasra Mani Pravika Pradyotito Dhamma Panasahasram Pradyotito Dhamma Panasahasram Muhurgrinanto Vachasanaruga Skalat Padenasya Kritani Takya Kirita Sahasra Mani Pravika Pradyotito Dhamma Panasahasram Muhu again and again. Grinantaha glorifying. Vachasa by words. Anudaga with great affection. Ishkalat Padena with symmetrical rhythm. Asya of the Lord. Kritani activities. Tadgyaha those who know the pastimes. Kirita helmets. Sahasra thousands. Mani Pravika glowing effulgence of the valuable stones. Pradyotita emanating from. Udhama rays. Fana hoots. Sahasram thousands. Translation. The four Kumaras, headed by Sanat Kumara, who all knew the transcendental pastimes of the Lord, glorified the Lord in rhythmic accents with selected words full of affection and love. At that time, Lord Sankarsana, with his thousands of raised hoods, began to radiate an effulgence from the glowing stones on his head. Please repeat. The four Kumaras, headed by Sanat Kumara, who all knew the transcendental pastimes of the Lord, glorified the Lord in rhythmic accents, with selected words, full of affection and love. At that time, Lord Sankarsana, with his thousands of raised hoods, began to radiate an effulgence from the glowing stones on his head. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. The Lord is sometimes addressed as Uttamashloka, which means one who's worshipped with selected words by devotees. A profusion of such selected words comes from a devotee who is fully absorbed in affection and love for the devotional service of the Lord. There are many instances in which even a small boy who was a great devotee of the Lord could offer excellent prayers in the choicest words for glorification of the pastimes of the Lord. In other words, without the development of fine affection and love, one cannot offer prayers to the Lord very suitably. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Salakaya Chakshurumilitam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namah. Namam Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamini Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine. Nirvisesha Sunyavari Paschatyadesh. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripasindhuvyaevacha. Patitanam Pavanevyo Vaishnavyo Namo Namaha. The four Kumaras headed by Sanat Kumara, who all knew the transcendental passings of the Lord, glorified the Lord in rhythmic accents with selected words full of affection and love. At that time, Lord Sankarsana, with his thousands of raised hoods, began to radiate an effulgence from the glowing stones on his head. So this chapter is titled Manifestation of Brahma from Vishnu. So this is a continuation of Vidura's questioning Maitreya. So that's the context of the narration at this point. Third and fourth canto of Bhagavatam bring these long extended exchanges between these two great souls. Once Srila Prabhupada said that sometimes these great personalities exchange roles, and either or could have been the speaker and could have been the hearer. He says that in reference to Maharaj Parikshit and Sukadeva Goswami. Hare Krishna. So in this case, Vidura had, I don't know if ended, I don't know, remember if there are more questions, but there was a whole barrage of questions, around 40 something. And sometimes those questions are subdivided. There are many, many questions that Vidura presented to Maitreya. But the essential question here is a few. What do you think is the essential question? I don't think there's one question, but there are many questions which are very important. And we have been hearing this canto for quite a while now, third canto. So what do you think is the essential question, if any, comes to mind? Many, many questions Vidura presented in several chapters. So any question or any point, those questions that you think it's crucial here, essential. Any suggestions?
There was some questions he was asking how the Lord works within the material images.
Right. Okay, so that's the contextual question.
There was a question about what's beyond, what happens after the annihilation, beyond this material world.
Right. So it's all about creation, as we can see. How does it happen? Right. Any other questions? No? It is considered an essential question. One of the questions that it is presented early, I think it's in the previous chapter. Vidura asks why people are endeavoring so much, and it's mentioned by Maitreya, I think in the beginning of this, text number 2. Why people are working so hard. Remember that one? One chapter to go. Here it is. Why people are working so hard for suffering. That's, I remember one of the questions I was hearing in class yesterday, and the devotee brought that point, so it was quite interesting. Excuse me. Prabhupada says in that purport that such questions are not at the level of Vidura, because Vidura wanted to know the pastimes of the Lord, and that was his level. But he started asking why people are suffering so much unnecessarily. He asked, No? Why people are so foolish and wasting their life, endeavoring so hard, and then dying. Everything that we achieve, everything that we acquired, this material world, eventually will perish. Doesn't matter how much energy you invest in anything, practically everything is going to be gone. So Vidura asks that question. It's kind of a rhetorical question. Why is it? Prabhupada explained in that purport that Vidura asked that question because he was concerned for the suffering of the people in this material world. And Maitreya refers to that. He says in text number 2, he says, "Let me now begin speaking on the Bhagavad Purana, which was directly spoken to the great sages by the personality of Godhead." This is the part. "For the benefit of those who are entangled in extreme miseries for the sake of very little pleasure." Very little pleasure. So the purpose of this conversation, it's not only to know, it's not a selfish endeavor. Prabhupada often warns us not to have a salvationist mentality or selfish mentality. Let me save myself, let me take it easy, let me go back home, back to God. Sometimes we may have that mentality. But that's not the mood of the Bhagavatam speakers. They're doing, discussing Krishna Katha for the benefit of everyone. And that's what Prabhupada also explains in the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita. In chapter 3, he says, the questions presented by Arjuna are representative of suffering humanity. Right? So that, if we don't have it, it's very hard to if you get a dry gumsha, and if you squeeze it, doesn't matter how much you squeeze it, nothing will come out because it's dry. In the same way, if we don't have compassion, and some of us may be very, very selfish, and we only think of I and mine and whatever is convenient for me, so it's very hard to relate to this point. So this is kind of the underlying tone of the description that's going to ensue now. Because all this is for the benefit of everyone. That's the Srimad Bhagavatam, how can you say, branding. What's that verse? Idam Bhagavatam Nama Purana Brahma Samhitam Uttama Shloka Charita Chakara Bhagavan Rishi. Janashrasaya Lokasya. That this Bhagavatam is named Bhagavatam, this Purana is named Bhagavatam. It is meant to glorify the Supreme Person, Uttama Shloka, the same word here. Chakara Bhagavan Rishi has been compiled by the great Muni, incarnation of Krishna, Bhagavan Rishi. And it's meant for the benefit of everyone. Shreya, Lokasya, the benefit of everyone. So that is the purpose of this Bhagavatam. And how much we are thinking of other people and how can we give this Bhagavatam to them. It's quite interesting, this section, these few verses, because it's like in a slow motion of what's going to happen. And Maitreya says here, right? Was in the previous one? Where he says, I'm going to speak now Bhagavatam. I'm going to explain now Bhagavatam. But it's quite interesting, this subsection, because Vidura have asked over 40 questions, and then Maitreya is going to answer now. Now, Maitreya is fully equipped to answer all those questions. Why? Because he has heard Bhagavatam from Krishna himself when he was presenting to Uddhava. Right? So he could have said, okay, now it's my turn. I got the mic, and I'm going to, put my stamp, Maitreya Uvacha. But instead of that, he takes a twist, and then he starts answering the question, repeating what he has heard from his superiors, right? Because once upon a time, the Kumaras, they asked from the Lord, and then they repeated that, and then someone heard it, and then someone heard it, and then he also heard it from that. So he's quoting that version instead of directly saying, oh, I heard it from the Lord, so it is like this. Sometimes that attitude, I don't want to hear anyone but Prabhupada or myself. I don't hear anyone's classes. I like to talk, but I don't like to listen to. So this is not the proper attitude, because it shows that we are not acknowledging the superiority of others. So Bhagavatam is not only the narration, not only the historical facts, not only the philosophical facts, but most importantly, the devotional aspect. Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains this in his Bhagavad Marichimala book, where he says that these narrations are not for our entertainment, but for our purification. And that's why some of these details are quite important, because they bring bhakti. That's the idea. And if we pay attention to the narration, or the characteristics of those who are involved in the narration, they have bhakti. And then we see this from the beginning of Bhagavatam. When the sages ask the question in first chapter of first canto, right? They ask about Krishna. They ask, what's the most beneficial thing for everyone? 6 questions they ask, right? And then later on they ask more questions in further chapters. But one of the first question they ask is, what is best for everyone? Arjuna asked that question to Krishna in chapter 2. What is best for me, he said. But the sages asked a different, sort of more expanded question, broader question. What is best for everyone? And chapter 1, it's called Questions by the Sages. In chapter 2, it's called Divinity and Divine Service. That's the answer. Right? That's the answer. Divinity means God, Supreme, and Divine Service. So all the questions of the sages are answered in the title of the 2nd chapter, Divinity and Divine Service. So the idea of these narrations are for us to understand Krishna, but even more importantly is to understand the devotees of Krishna. And they bring about this aspect of devotion. Without this devotion, then everything is useless, pretty much. Rama eva hi kevalam. It is explained in the Bhagavatam that if we are not able to awaken that spirit of devotion, then everything is useless, right? Because we will be caught again in this cycle of birth and death. So here in this particular verse, the 4 Kumaras headed by Sanat Kumara, they glorify the Lord. But an important thing here, it says, with selected words, with full affection and love. Full affection and love. So Prabhupada explains that Uttama Shloka means one who's worshipped with selected words by devotees. Those selected words are those words that do not only accurately describe the Lord, but are mixed like a preparation. Like those expert cooks, they know, if they throw something, some spice, it will bring a particular flavor, yeah, a smell, an aroma, a look to the preparation. So in the same way, these words are spiced with bhakti, and that's what we are concerned with. There are several contexts in this narration. The context is that the Lord is being explained here. Creation, first canto, second canto, cosmic manifestation, and third canto. What's the title of this canto? Status quo, right? Status quo. Which means after things are manifested, so how they are settled. It's like when the festivals take place, and the tractor comes and the trucks come and the flowers come and everyone is doing something and pulling and hanging and all that, right? So after that's done, that's status quo. That's how things are now. Now everything is set. So in the third canto, how the creation is manifested is explained. Why? This is the first question that we need to ask when we inquired in the spiritual terms. Why? Why is this happening? This whole Bhagavatam is an explanation of the first line of the Vedanta Sutra, the first line of Srimad Bhagavatam, Janmadi Asyayataha, which means everything comes from Krishna. That's the first line of the Bhagavatam. And sometimes we hear, sometimes we read, now I'm going to speak Bhagavatam. Have you noticed? Sometimes it said, Maitreya says, now I'm going to speak Bhagavatam. And you think, now you're going to speak Bhagavatam, but Bhagavatam didn't start three cantos before? What is this sometimes Bhagavatam? Srimad Bhagavatam. He says, now I'm going to speak Bhagavatam. Which means is, now I'm going to speak about the essence of this narration. This is the essence. Right? Like in Bhagavad Gita, we have the 9th chapter. It's called Most Confidential Knowledge. And what's the first thing that Krishna says in the essential verses of the Bhagavad Gita? The first line, Aham Sarvasya Prabhu. I am the source of everything. Everything comes from me. Exactly the same. Just the difference is that in that case, Krishna says it. Here, Vyasadeva explains it. Janmadi Asyayata, from Vedanta Sutra. So the purpose of this book is to understand Krishna. But in the process, we learn how to understand ourselves. Drishta eva atmanishvare. Bhagavatam explains in second chapter, first canto, that after we understand everything, and Prabhupada explains this nicely. He says, in the morning, we see how the sun rises. Right? It's dark. You hardly can see your hand if it's really, really dark. But what happens when the sun rises? You don't only see the sun and everything that it's around, but you see yourself. That's a point that Prabhupada often liked to make. That you see the sun rising and everything, but then also you see yourself. So in self-realization, that's what it's intended. That's one of the goals, that you can see who you really are. Not just the body, not the skin color or the nationality, but actually your true self, part and parcel of Krishna. So here, glorification of Krishna is happening, and the great saints, the Kumaras, it is described, where is that? It's described, isn't this chapter? Where it says that they came through the Ganga, isn't this chapter? I think it was in this chapter. Here it is, the previous verse. Who was here in the class yesterday? Who gave the class yesterday? I didn't see it online. Basu, Shasta? And he read 2, 3 verses, right? I recall. It is here. Yeah, the Ganges water flows from the lotus feet of Vishnu. Yeah. And it is explained that these great sages, sometimes the yogis, they just, Prabhupada explains this repeatedly, that you may enter into it's like, you have the Twit River, and then you may enter, you have some city powers, and then you enter here in Maulimba, and then you end up in Tweets or somewhere down the coast, quick, no need for freeway. So in that way, the sages, sometimes they can do that. They can travel through the holy rivers, and they appear somewhere else. Right? But we are not after those things. In fact, the Bhagavatam explains early in the first chapter, that because in this narration, the Bhagavatams of the Ganga, sometimes it is glorified. But what is more powerful than the Ganga? You know? Who? Saintly devotees, yes. Jad Pada Shramshaya Sutta. Jad Pada Samshaya Sutta. Munaya Prasamayana. First canto, first chapter, takes 15 or something. It is explained that those people who are completely surrendered to the Supreme Person, they're even more powerful than the Ganga. And Prabhupada explains clearly the devotees are more powerful than the Ganga. So yeah, that's the power of the devotees. Why? Again, that's the question. My little grandson now, he learned how to ask why. And whatever you say to him, he goes like, why? And then the whole purpose starts. And you have to explain things. First they say no. That's one of the things that little kids do. No? When they learn how to say no, no, no. But then goes into more philosophical. Why? You have to explain things. So why? Why the devotees are more powerful than Ganga? I mean, there are many answers. Yes. Anyone else? Because they are teaching. Teaching. The Ganga is not teaching. Teaching a lesson sometimes. They can? Right. Yeah. Yeah, the Ganga, it is considered pure because it has touched the lotus feet of Krishna. The story how Ganga comes and, from Lord Bhavana piercing universal gel covering, and then it trickles down to earth, falls on the head of Lord Shiva. Name of Lord Shiva is Gangadhara, right? Because it carries Ganga. Sometimes Ganga is considered one of the wives of Shiva, something like that. But the devotees are explained, Prabhupada explains in that purpose, that the devotees are constantly in touch with the lotus feet of the Lord because they are preaching, they're teaching the glories of the Lord. So therefore, the Ganga has touched the Lord, but the devotees are constantly in contact with the Lord. One time, one devotee asked Srila Prabhupada, Prabhupada, I want to be always at the shadow of your lotus feet. You heard that one? Yeah. What Prabhupada said? That will be very difficult because my feet are always moving. So Prabhupada had this thing that he could turn things very philosophical and deep and emotional. He would turn it very comical, but at the same time true, because Prabhupada's always moving. So in the same way, the Lord is always moving, and the Lord is always, that's why it's called movement, Hare Krishna movement. So Krishna is moving and the devotees are moving along with Krishna. And particularly these movement has this mission. We always talk about the mission. And the mission is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu wanted that this knowledge is given to everybody. And that's something that we need to meditate on, and in line with what we were saying in the beginning, that this is not, or should not be, a selfish interest, that I'm just here about hearing Bhagavatam for the sake of my own salvation, but rather for the sake of others. So how much are we thinking? And I'm not saying that you're not thinking, it's a rhetorical question. And how much are we doing for bringing others? So on Sunday we have this beautiful festival, and so many people were here. But I thought if Prabhupada will see this, he will be very happy. And he was very, very happy from the first day of Ratha Yatra in 1967. He was so sick, recovering from his stroke, that he couldn't even attend the first Ratha Yatra. And then the devotees so enthusiastically at the end of the festival, they drove all the way with a beat up truck, and Jagannath, Subhadra, and Baladev at the back, and everyone just sitting together there behind the ute. Went to see Prabhupada, and Prabhupada said, "This is the first one, and I will bring many, many others. Just watch," he said. Right? And if he will be observing or hearing the report of this festival, then he quite probably would ask, what about everyone else? He wants everyone, And someone said, is there any other festivals like this but in town? Because so many people in town, they could have also benefited. But of course, I don't know how many people came. What? A few hundreds? The banana festival. All right. Okay. Here, down here. All right. In the Gold Coast. Yeah. So like that. And I know that this area is very blessed because you have several Ratha Yatras, right? From Brisbane all the way here. And it used to be in Byron Bay. I don't know if it's still there? No? It was a famous one because my Guru Maharaj always will tell us about that and show us pictures like that. On the beach, yeah. And with Indradyumna Swami and other great saints like that. So the idea is to give this to everyone, not only be satisfied with our little plate of prasadam and whatever we can, learn and do for ourselves, but what about others? Prabhupada could have stayed in Vrindavan very comfortably, somewhat, in Radha Damodar, but he took the trouble. He took the trouble to go and to the west and try to save as many people as possible. Because as he's explaining one of these purports, I was reading, he said that the mission of the Lord is to save those in the material world. That's the mission. And that's why these narrations are there, because these narrations are what Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati called the Brihat Mirdanga. Right? Sometimes when we hear kirtan, right, we hear the drum, right? And I was observing on Sunday, so expert. It's amazing what they can do with these drums. I remember in our early days how we just used the ISKCON beat, tick, 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 And Prabhupada taught like that, very simple. But now they can do so many things. It's just amazing, So I was just trying to appreciate, not only because I'll never play like that Mirdang in my life, not in this one at least, but these young boys, they play amazingly, incredible. And at that moment when I was just thinking, wow, this is so beautiful. And then that realization came that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur used to say, don't be satisfied with beating hard the drum, right? Because it doesn't matter how hard you beat the drum, I'm sure it cannot be heard in Maulampa, right? Doesn't matter how much amplification you put, I don't know, maybe, but most improbable. But then he said, these books are the Brihat Mirdanga, the universal drum. So these books will go everywhere, in every language, every town and village, and people will change their heart. So our concern, our real concern, is to present this to learn this, to imbibe this, applying it in our lives, and give it to others. That's the mission. That's why the parampara are there, particularly Bhaktivinoda Thakur, the six Goswamis, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and down the line. That's their intention. These sages come for us. These sages come for everyone, right? To save everyone. So in that mood, we need to take up this process, this mission, and try to give it to others as much as possible. I was talking to some devotees in South America yesterday, and they were telling me how, in some temple, there was a devotee, I think 69, 70, and they were discussing Krishna Katha like that. And the last discussion he had was that any moment, some class or something that was going on, any moment one may go, and everyone was yes. Yeah, right? Because any moment, Prabhupada often say, Parikshit Maharaj knew that he will last for 7 more days. But we don't know if we're going to last for 7 more years or for 7 more minutes. We don't know. But he knew, So in this way, these devotees were telling me that the next day they went to wake up the devotee and he didn't wake up. He was quite regulated. They said, oh, Prabhu hasn't come for Mangalarti. So they went and see him and he has gone. He just passed on his sleep, right? Just very peacefully. So any moment. So we were reflecting with these devotees that any moment. So if you will have 7 days, what would you do? Or if we would know how many more years we have, what would you do? Would you be doing the same thing? Would you be doing more intensity? What would be the difference? A friend of mine often says, he's kind of a joker, but he always says, I don't know how much of a joke that is, but he says, in 10 years, we're all going to be dead. We are kind of the same age and we join together. So he says, in 10 years, we're going to be gone. So we better do it quick. Like that. And Prabhupada actually had that time. Prabhupada, when he came in 65, he had 12 years, right? 12 years, according to the Vedic calculation, it's a lifetime. That's why in the Shikshastaka, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Yugajita. Yuga means an age, an era. It's a Kali Yuga, Yugajita. So what it means is that according to Vedic calculation, 12 years is a lifetime. And in psychology also, in 12 years, it's like a kind of a different person practically. Your psyche has changed or evolved by different. You see a kid 0 years old, 1 year old. You see him when he's 12, 13, or you see him when he's 24, 25. Different, has evolved. In the same way, in Vedic terms, 12 years is a lifetime. So how much time do we have? We don't know. So the idea is to understand not only the historical context, not only the geographical, where it happened, as Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, not only the details of the pastime, but the devotional context. The devotees are bringing this spice, this condiment. You say condiment in English? Condiment? Yeah. And that is bhakti. You see, from the sages to Sutta, Narada, Vyasa, the Pandavas and Krishna, Parikshit Maharaj and Sukadev Goswami, Narada and Brahma, that Brahma and Krishna, Vidura and Maitreya. And now in the picture comes the 4 Kumaras, which also is explained that they have this bhakti. Interesting how the Kumaras became devotees, or as it is explained in the Shastras, they took the path of devotional service. How did they become devotees? Sometimes we become devotees by a plate of halava. In their case, how did they become devotees? Smelling tulsi leaves. right? Just the fragrance of, what's that verse? Forgot the verse. Barish Maharaj explained that he engaged every part of his body, even his subtle body. Savaimana Krishna Padavindayo. His mind in thinking of Krishna. His hands in cleaning the temple of the Lord. His words in glorifying the qualities of the Lord. Like that, different parts. His eyes in seeing the beautiful forms of the Lord. His head, how did he engage his head? Putting it on the floor at the feet of Krishna. His desires, in desiring to fulfill the desires of the Lord. Like that. So that's Jatatam Tamashloka. Like that. That's the definition of the Supreme Person. That it's glorified by the attitude of love and devotion that his devotees have for him, and the reciprocation that Krishna has with those devotees. That's as we were explaining in the Jagannath pastime, how he appeared to Prabhupada, how the Ratha Yatra manifested, because Prabhupada wanted that. So how much we want to benefit others, we may not have that desire, but the more we associate with the great sages, like this described here in the Bhagavatam, the more we hear about Srila Prabhupada, right? I don't know if any of you had this, maybe some of you had these tendencies to go and save the world and you know, be a missionary, or I know some devotees who were wanting to be nuns or priests like that. Maybe surely some of you might have had that. I had no idea. No, that was not in my plans. I had a whole different perception. My dogs, my surfboards, my surf shack, that you know, I had it very clear. My degree, I was very, very clear what I wanted. And Prabhupada came and destroyed those those dreams, you know, luckily. But yes, the more we associate with Prabhupada, the more we read about these great saints, the more that awakens in our heart. Let me do something for him. Let me help him. He says in the beginning of the Nectar of Devotion, the introduction, he says that we should have a certain spirit in our service. And in our service, we need to think, I am just a servant or an assistant of these great acharyas, of the previous acharyas, he said. Right? That I'm just assisting Srila Prabhupada and the Parampara, my spiritual master, our spiritual masters, in helping others. That's it. This movement is for saving the world. That's what it is. Maybe it sounds too big for some of us. Saving the world. I barely can think of saving myself. But this is for saving the whole world. So if we can have that conviction as Prabhupada had, then we're onto something. But if not, we will have some fun, we will have some good time, some good prasadam, some wonderful festival, this mela, that mela. But the real purpose of Bhagavatam wouldn't be there, as it was brought from Prabhupada. Prabhupada, he came to bring us pure Krishna consciousness, nothing else. What do you call that? Pure, you know, sincere. You know the word sincere comes from? Yeah, Italian. You're Italian. Marble. Yes, that's it. Here. Sincere. Cera means stain, like that. Sincere means without. It's like pure marble, you know, pure, white, totally spotless. That's what Prabhupada brought to us. So that's why I remember once Purijan Prabhu was giving us a statistics of how many times Prabhupada used the word rascal. Thousands. And nonsense and all that, you know, because it's pure, nothing. He was very tolerant, but he wanted us to understand pure bhakti, apply pure bhakti, and to give pure bhakti to everyone. That's what his mission was. But here we are, um, barely able to pronounce properly Sanskrit. I remember reading that when he was giving Bhagavatam Brahman initiation to Shyam Sundar Prabhu. So he's telling the Gayatri mantra, and then they had the sheet there, and then they will read and all that. And then he says, okay, so he told the Gayatri mantra, says, now repeat. So he will repeat the Sanskrit, and Prabhupada just got into a laugh. He couldn't stop laughing, hearing him repeating the Sanskrit. He was just holding his belly, He said, it's okay, it's all right. So, Chinese or Latins or whatever background, we barely can pronounce properly. Some of the Pandits or Brahmins will laugh at us, but here we are trying. My Guru Maharaj once explained in Thailand, in Bangkok, a group of people that we have brought for a class, and they were saying that they cannot pronounce Krishna. Chinese sometimes they say Krishna. In Thailand also, Krishna. They cannot say Krishna properly. Krishna. Kilishna, they say. And then my Guru Maharaj explained that sometimes he's like a little baby, that he or she can barely talk, but the father or mother, they appreciate. They say Baba, Dada, Papa, like that. And the father and mother, they feel, oh, that's so nice, so cute. In the same way, Krishna is hearing that, Chinese or whatever other, I'm just saying that example, they pronounce Krishna imperfectly, but they are trying. But there's some love, some devotion. That's what the Father appreciates. Okay, so we stop here. Any questions, any points? We have 10 seconds. Any questions? Gan?
Following exactly what you were saying, Daily Fathers, I came across a quote from Prabhupada. This is where he defines what ISKCON is. Where he defined ISKCON in many different ways, but in this one instance, he said, ISKCON means to feel the suffering of humanity.
Thank you. So, yeah. I was hearing a passage of Prabhupada that I think it was the first Gaur Purnima in Mayapur. Was that when it happened? 1970 something? One? The big Mayapur festival. And there was a big, no, it was when the Lotus building was inaugurated. That was when it happened. So the Lotus building was inaugurated, and they had a big feast. And then, everyone's happy. The first building, the Lotus building, where Prabhupada's room are. And Jayapataka Maharaj, my Guru Maharaj, he's telling the story that, they were all so happy that they made it, in the middle of nowhere, so much endeavor. They finally finished Prabhupada's building, Lotus building. And Prabhupada was there, and everyone was, like here it says that Sankarshan, these 1,000 raised hoods began to radiate an effulgence from the glowing stones on his head. He was so happy. Sometimes you see the devotees are so happy when they come from Parikram or come from Sankirtan and glowing like that. So they say Prabhupada was glowing with pride and happiness that finally we're. And then he heard some commotion at the back. And then what happened is that after the feast, in the banana leaves that devotees have been honoring prasadam, they throw, and the remnants are there, and there were some dogs eating out of that place, and the kids were fighting the dogs away with sticks, and then Prabhupada said how hungry they would be that, so then it says Prabhupada started tearing because he thought, it cannot be, once Krishna temple is established, no one can go hungry, no one can go in 10 miles of radius, everyone should be, fed and happy and given shelter like that. So, yes, that's what we are here for. That's what we're here for. Thank you. Kantaraju Bhatan Ki, Jai Shri Prabhupada Ki, or Pramanandi.